Okay. Well, welcome again. Another month down. What we're hoping to cover today is a little bit further discussion on risk. Today's going to be a lot more user groupy. I'm hoping, or kind of thinking it will be. Depends on how far Paul goes. He says he's got nothing to say, but that's yet to be.
I've got nothing.
That's yet to be proven. It could be a lot longer than the nothing. But anyway. So yeah, welcome everyone. It's fantastic to see everyone. It's a great engagement, and that's just awesome. That's fantastic from our point of view. A couple of little bits of quick news. We've actually just won 2 more customers to join the family, which is great. Which is Marwa, and how do you say it? Is it Marwa? Marwa? Anyway, Andrew, Ian's on mute.
Merway.
No, Merway. Merway or Merway?
So for all of the other people, it's Charleville, the start of the Outback, where the Royal Flying Doctor Service have got a base, 7 hours west of Bundy.
Yeah, tiny. Yeah, it is, yeah. And Shepparton. Shepparton's just come on, which is great. I was hoping Chris was going to join us. I don't know whether he's actually come in. I can't see him here. Anyway, Chris will be joining us next time, I'm sure. So today, I'll just sort of go through a few housekeeping items and just discuss a little bit about some of the stuff we're working on in sort of principle, and then Paul will dive into it. And then we can sort of almost hand it over to the floor a little bit in terms of a couple of the discussions that have been going on, which we've progressed, and some of the work's been done, particularly on the risk side and what have you. But let me just do a little bit of the housekeeping. Let me just share my screen and just point a few things. So just pointing out on the website, we've now got the resource under resources. I hope everyone can see that, hopefully. We have the Fleet sort of community tab here where it's a bit of a sort of bloggy running of items. So anything to do with Fleet and the community, if you like, will appear in here. There's also the group we've set up and maybe Paul can talk to this a little bit if there's any questions over it, but we're just sort of playing around with a Google group, which is kind of like an email kind of discussion group. We haven't quite figured out. I think we've only got 3 members at the moment, so membership's not exactly taking off. But
do you want to just maybe I can talk to this, because this is something that just refresh your page, Mark. So it's an email discussion group. We made it almost too easy to join. We didn't want to automatically enroll everybody, and also it will take a while to get off the ground. And so, but basically how it works, if you've never been involved in an email discussion group, you send an email to the discussion group and everybody in that group gets it, which of course opens up all sorts of cans of worms. But in the first instance, when you join the discussion group by clicking, as Mark will now demonstrate, on join email discussion group, you'll see it'll, assuming, we're an IT company, so we often get it wrong. It should say that, okay? And you just send that to the group, and the group won't get it because you won't be a member until you've sent this email, okay? So if you send any email at all to fleet@formbird.com, you'll become a member, unless you send an email that says, please, I don't want to be a member, okay? So that's kind of the group. So if everyone in our group does that today, that would be a great thing. And then we'd actually have enough people to actually have a discussion, so that if someone actually does send an email to the group for a discussion, it doesn't seem to go into thin air. I will take a more active role in terms of actually getting people in and trying to keep the discussion going. Okay, back to you, Mark.
But if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, and that's fine.
That's right. Yeah,
no pressure.
It's very oldie worldy discussion groups. They're sort of one of the original internet things. So it's quite interesting. I think it could work. I think it could work really well. So I'm willing to experiment at least. Okay, back to you.
Okay. just on a sort of, and Paul can sort of talk to this a little bit more. So one of the things that have been going on in terms of work effort has been getting, how do we process, if you like, a summary of the vehicle's activity, which can then be used for all sorts of reporting purposes and automated processes and what have you. And particularly now that we're introducing Geotab into the picture, where can we put this sort of collection of data? And it's been a bit of an issue in how we trigger services. To date, we've been triggering the services based on actual creation of the event. So if you do the fuel upload, it actually creates it at that point in time. And then if you're doing some processing on and we actually took it off some of the items like the daily drivers, because it was becoming a little bit unreliable in terms of what people were putting in. What we've decided to do is actually technically separate the sort of processing of that data with the sort of the base creation. So what we're actually doing now is heading towards a single record, which will be, if you like, a vehicle summary of what's gone on during the day. And what we see that being is a collection point for summarizing all sorts of things in terms of, distances traveled, hours consumed, any error codes coming from, say, the CAN bus and what have you, or any stuff that could be used that can be then reported on or processed. And that'll include the setting off the schedules and what have you. So it'll essentially be scanning whatever data is in your system and then pulling it forward and pulling it out and putting it against that and then using that as the trigger. So it kind of gives us, I suppose, a collection point and separates what you might be doing with your system and then what triggers it. So we can put a little bit more logic about, I suppose, validating what data is coming to form that piece of data. So that if we're using the daily drivers, it may be cross-validated with something else before we decide that vehicle actually is up to that Odo reading or that hours or what have you. What we see then is that we will use that daily processed summary of that vehicle's behavior and activity to both trigger, but then also we sort of see that could go into some great reporting of activity, so utilizations, and we're going to record even if there was no activity. So a zero is just as important as a something. So, if it's traveled 0 kilometers in that day, it'll have 0 kilometers, 0 hours, but it'll be an actual entry that we can then use, statistically to aggregate and what have you. So the idea is that we'll have a nightly process, which is pulling all this stuff together and we can just build on it, as we can collect more data from more sources that will then feed into, I suppose, anything else we want to be doing with that data, whether it be, as I said, triggering automatic processes or reporting or whatever it might be. So we're kind of separating out the collection of the data and what we do with it and summarizing it and then making it easier then to do stuff with it and being very careful and also aggregating it so that we can sort of run against that also any sort of statistical analysis that might be happening in terms of aggregation or rolling it up or anything else can go into that so that, again, it makes it a lot easier for us to report. But also there's a sort of a bit of a snapshot of where that vehicle is at any point in time. So, and really pulling it from all sorts of places. So that's kind of, that's going to be interesting. In terms of where we're going with Geotab, I suppose the first break of that is going to be the Odo. So I don't want to necessarily spend a lot of time on the Geotab stuff, and unless people really want us to explore it and understand a little bit more. I think I sort of mentioned where we're going with it and why we're going with it in the last presentation, but there's a lot of data in here, and we're going to try and really. Obviously, we're going to start with the basic stuff, the Odo and all of that. But it could be that we also start collecting, I don't know, minimum voltages or whatever, so we can actually be triggering, some events, what is the minimum battery voltage, is it below a certain threshold? And some of this stuff we're going to want what is important and what can we actually do with it? What are the interesting things that we could trigger within the system. There could be on a combination, we can sort of think a lot more broadly too. It not just is going to the workshop, it could be going to the daily driver, or it could be, incorporated into some of those other processes, so that, if the voltage was low that night, the next daily driver that someone selects, is it going to say, look, your voltage is looking pretty bad, go and check it. Is the alternator working? Can you drive it down to the workshop and make sure it's looking good? I don't know what some of that sort of low hanging fruit is. And we also don't want to be building stuff that, is a once in a moonlight event. But if there's sort of some stuff around, the relationship between the operating vehicle and the users and the consumers of it and what have you, then that could be really exciting. Obviously there's all the sort of safety and that this may also start coming together with some of the safety and the all the stuff that we're working on now with the risk. And I don't know where it plays totally, other than looking at risk in terms of the behaviour of the asset and relationship to drivers and all the rest of it. I'll cut off the screen and again, if people are wanting a session on what Geotab does, or a full-on demo, then let us know. We're continuing to explore what we can get. We can basically pull any data out of the system. Like I said, that was always the attraction of this technology, was that they were spending a lot of time on that CAN bus data, and also the way they treat the movement data is actually very interesting as well. So we're up for ideas and thoughts on what we can do. We'll sort of get all the sort of obvious stuff in there, but and then things will start showing itself. I think the really exciting ones, obviously the automatic scheduling and all the rest of it, but then moving into really detailed utilization and really understanding, when our vehicle's being used, how much utilization is there, and really trying to then say, well, this is what the fleet really looks like in terms of behavior and movement and all the rest of it. Let me stop my sharing. Wherever that might be. So I'll hand it over to Paul Kalb, and he can have a little discussion, and it can be as long or as short. He did tell me this morning he had nothing to say, so I'll see how much nothing to say is. So Paul, do you want to share your screen or talk through some stuff?
Yep. I'll just set that. The main thing I really want to cover today is the latest upgrade was supposed to go through on Monday, but we missed that target. There was a couple of last minute changes that kind of need to go through. So I was hoping to sort of do that this evening. One of the changes that's going through is a few changes to materials. The UI is quite different. I was a little bit worried that if I kind of just did it, all the guys in the workshop, generally start pretty early, and I generally do the updates pretty late. So I was a bit worried that if I just did the update, they'd come in the next morning and go, oh, how do I use this? So I wanted to sort of cover it today, and what's kind of changed. It's essentially the same thing. It's just basically the UI's changed a bit. So whereas before there was a sort of selection here for a material to use it. I am sharing the screen, aren't I? Yeah. Yep. And then there was an action drop down here to select what action you want to do with it. I've changed those to buttons. And essentially just use the buttons instead. So I wanted to use one of those, and I can use that. One of the problems that I identified with the last iteration of it was that you could, at one point, these documents are sort of created separately from the page that you're working on. So they exist in a different spot, but these documents then update this page. It was possible to create this document and then navigate away from the page and not have the page update with the total costs. So I fixed that problem. address the UI issues as well. It was all a little bit clunky. So I was a little bit worried that that might be a bit of a surprise to people if they're using it on a daily basis. I know that pretty rapid succession in Ed up there was going, oh, how do we use this new one? And I've changed it basically again on him. So hopefully for the better, hopefully for the last time. But I was a little bit worried about just sort of banging it in. So these buttons mirror the same functionality as what the drop downs were. So it's use. You can favourite a material, unfavourite it. Unfavourite is not a good word. It is. When a material is created, it's either created as a material from stock, which is selected from this list, or an additional material, which is something you kind of buy in from somewhere else. You don't. It's not stock, but it's just basically bought in. Once you've used it, there's a number of options to sort of unuse it, if you like. Additional materials can be removed, as in that was a mistake, I'm just going to get rid of it. Stock can be restocked, so it will recalculate this, take this quantity out of here and re-update the stock values based on being back in stock. And you can dispose of something as well. So disposed is like I've used it, but it's not really part. It's kind of broken on the way through, or it's being used, but it's been disposed of after use, if you like. I thought that was so that mirrors the functionality that it was before. Other things I've been working on, a couple of things around the daily driver, which we're just sort of just doing today. There was an issue identified where the daily driver would create a request if it was found, if a fault was identified. And that's fine, but if the same fault's identified the next day, another request would be created for that fault too, which basically meant that you'd have all these requests to manage somewhere along the way. So I've been doing some work around that to try and just to take that automation away and have a user create the decision based on the priority of the daily driver. So if the daily driver comes in as urgent here, a request will be created. If it doesn't come in as urgent, it comes in as non-urgent, and it's failed, then it ends up as a daily driver in a pending state, which can be reviewed in the daily driver. Find it. It's here somewhere. I might close it. Daily driver report. There it is. So there's been a bit of modification here. We've got a new column saying it has a request being generated, a new column for status. In this grid, we can got some filtering, so you can filter based on date created. You can display all or only display the failed ones. There's a function here to in the failed checks column in this column, it's only showing the failed ones, because if you were to put every check in there, this grid would be enormous. But we've created this functionality, which gives you a list of all of the checks. And from this grid, you can also do sort of status updates by checking select. So I'm selecting from this grid to do some updates, and if it's in a pending state, we can open it as a request, or we can open it or we can just change it to a request, and then it just enters the normal request queue as it normally does. It would need sort of like a started and stop date kind of arrangement, expected start, expected completion date, and you can close a daily driver from here as well by selecting something that is in pending state. Once it's open, it's a request. When it's pending, it's still a daily driver. And so the change is kind of around the status. So when I change it from pending to open, it becomes a request. So that's some work done this morning. Mark was saying about the utilisation and the sort of common document to collect that information. There is utilisation in the application at the moment. I don't think anybody's really using it. And there was a couple of issues with it in that you had to actually create like a manual utilisation entry before it actually did anything, because it needed something to utilise from. So there's been a few changes there. This document that's produced by as a nightly update, like Mark was saying, you're looking at a bunch of test stuff here that's all kind of rubbish. But on this document, there'll be a bunch of fields that will be expanded. At the moment, it's got it'll capture the current primary meter read, the current secondary meter read, and the current fuel read, based on any document that has that information on it. Like Mark said, that functionality has kind of been turned off for a couple of reasons. There was some sort of clashes with the fuel import, in that the meter would be used in the fuel import, but it would be coming from various sources. And so the fuel import would often fail because the meter, by the time you got the fuel import in, the meter had all sort of changed from the fuel import. So this sort of, the fuel import now will not update the asset. Any document that records the primary meter will not update the asset. It'll all be done through this nightly sort of collection of data, and then we'll figure it out from there and then update the asset based on the information that we collect on a nightly basis. So that also frees us up to do things like, the distance travelled and stuff like that doesn't necessarily need to be calculated from the fuel import, because it's sort of captured in various other places as well. We're still doing the calculation on the fuel import, although I'm removing it from the document and making a fuel import report for distance travelled. I think I've completed that. Let me just have a look. So fuel receipt report. That's probably got something on it. No. Okay. I'll have to find some test data to show it next time. But the distance travel that was calculated on the fuel receipt docket, is no longer calculated there. It'll be in this report, which I think is much better, because it's actually sort of gets around a couple of other problems, like if you import a fuel receipt which is before the most recent fuel receipt, then there was a bunch of other calculations to do and move around all of the other fuel distance travelled calculations on all of the other fuel receipts. If it sort of sat in the middle of those, if something's already been created, so we're going to stop doing that too. That was about it from me, really, I think.
Paul, did you want to talk about the risk replacement? Oh, not the risk replacement. Sorry, the risk analysis stuff.
Yeah. So we've made a bit of a start on it. It's going to look very much like a work order, or will be a work order. Let's see if we can find it. We basically took a cut of an existing work order with with the service with the checks on it. So it's a combined of like the PM's, basically a cut down PM service type of arrangement. Risk checks will be here. We'll draw those risks, those checks from a mapping document in a similar way to we do with the asset group mapping. If you haven't seen that, we're going to have a look at that. So this is an example of what we're calling a mapping document. It's kind of like a reference document that the code refers to do various things within the system. You can see here in the daily driver checks, these are all the checks that are associated with the daily driver for this asset type. So this is an asset ATV called bike. The mapping document that we set up for the risk assessment will be a mapping document per asset, based on the conversation that we had, the meeting that we had, where the risk assessment is really asset specific and it can't be sort of grouped up at the group level. That will mean, you know, you'll need one of these mapping documents for every asset. So we'll create some sort of functions to clone an existing one where you've got, you know, a fleet of, say, Hiluxes, and they've all got the same risk assessment. We'll clone those documents and make that easy to do. But essentially, we'll set up something like this where there's a link to the asset and a set of checks which are available, and they'll appear just as they do in the PM service or the daily driver in this list. The other thing that I'm thinking about doing, which I think will be useful for quite a number of purposes, is on these checks, is to put like a priority, like a drop-down priority. That way you can, when the data is kind of saved back to these documents, you can kind of say, okay, in the example of, say, like a daily driver, you might prioritize some of the checks above others. So, for instance, you know, a body check might be a priority 2 check, in that, you know, if it's dinted, then yeah, that's not a good thing. But it doesn't really, it's not, you know, the highest priority to fix. Whereas something like, you know, my seatbelt doesn't work, should be sort of pretty much at the top of the list, you know. So we could then grab that data off those check documents and then create a list in the back end that said, you know, these are all of the priority ones that failed. Once we've got that list, we can get a report for daily driver where we have like a count of sort of like high priority failures, and you'll be able to see like the asset, you know, failing, or the number of failures per asset, and see that on a check by check basis based on priority, which I think will be quite handy. And I think that'd be quite handy for the risk assessment stuff too, and probably even for the service PM checks. So that's a piece of work that I kind of just dreamt up this morning, and get that done along with a bunch of other stuff. So a risk assessment, back to that. Risk assessment work order, we'll create the mapping document, we'll create the code that runs the mapping on this, but once I've got sort of like templates to do that already, because it's a pretty common, it's the same way as the other mapping documents are all sort of referenced, and all of that is kind of like boilerplate code. So I can just basically reference stuff that I've already done. So it shouldn't take too long to actually get that work order up and running. I guess the process of creating that work order, I've had a bit of think about that too. It seems to me that, you know, on the work order would be created as part of some other request. So probably like a PM service, you would potentially, you know, do that as part of the PM service. So it would be available on PM service to select there, and, you know, perhaps a repair type as well, perhaps on the repair general repair order as well. So you just select that and do it as part of the other part of the job.
The other one, Paulie, we could look at, and I suppose this could be again part of the discussion, is have specific requests around the berthing and the disposal process, because those are probably two events where you'd be doing a risk assessment. If I'm kind of heard people correctly in the past.
Yep.
So it could be that we'd actually have a berthing process and then a disposal process, and both of them would include, I suppose, a risk assessment.
Yep.
And again, this is, we're about to hand over to everyone and get some ideas and thoughts and what have you. And like I said, Paul had absolutely nothing to say or show.
Well, now I've finished, so there.
Thanks, Paul. Very good. I suppose if you could stop sharing the screen, and we'll perhaps sort of pretty much hand it over to people, and I suppose just not quite go around the table, but anyone who wants to chip in or throw something out there, or either on the topic or off the topic, don't mind. Maybe we stick to the current development and items there you might have questions about, so we make sure we get those out of the way, particularly since they might impact people, or you might want something there.
I've actually got something on the risk assessments, because I got audited last week by an external OHS auditor, and they delved deeply into the plant assessor risk assessment. And what it doesn't identify is the risk assessment just does the machine or the item of plant. It doesn't do the operation of the plant, or you've utilised the plant. What are the risks when you're finishing up using the plant? If you don't close this, if you leave this out, if you leave a boom up, what are all the risks associated with that? That risk assessment didn't identify those issues. So
is that around training, Marie, or actual operation on the day? How does that? What were they trying to target there? Just can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, what happened was we recently got a drain cleaning unit, and the guys went out. We did a risk assessment; it was all fine. So we thought the guys went out and used it. They left the boom up, and they were starting to drive away, and they nearly reversed into one of our sheds. There was no alarm on the boom to say that the boom was up while the vehicle was driving. There was no warning buzzer or light or anything in the dash that stipulated that that boom was up. And when we got back in touch with the manufacturer, there's no Australian standard to say that you have to have that. It's a nice to have. So basically what we're saying is there needs to be another check as part of the risk assessment in when you've completed using that item, what can go wrong if it's not packed away properly.
So it's almost like a daily driver when you finished using it.
Yeah, like you're saying, you can check it when the machine's stationary, but then you've got to do risks of what it is when it's operational, the risks of it being when it's operated, and then the risks of when you're packing it up. If you don't close something properly and you're driving along, can it fly away? All that, open up, hit another vehicle. Those types of things were identified, which didn't get picked up through that risk assessment.
How would they, in terms of a manual or a new process, or how did the auditors see that you would actually implement something like that? That sounds like a job safety, part of the works side rather than the actual asset risk.
So the JSA is on the site, with each site. It's not actually on the vehicle itself.
So this is more like putting posting a shutdown checklist or something, a bit like
correct. Well, what's in, out, what's up, down, what's open, closed, that type of thing.
Sounds more like a safe work procedure to me, where you'd start off, what do you do at the start, what do you do during, and then at the end, what do you do, and all the risks associated with it.
Yeah, see, they're not picked up in the safe work procedure.
Have you sort of, Marie, have you given it some, you obviously given it some thought because you're being pulled up on it. Have you got some thought on how we could help it, or how you'd introduce something that would help that issue?
Well, the only thing we were thinking of is just basically some kind of a checklist. What can, like the checklist would say, what can go wrong of anything that's open, not shut, in, not out, not out, not in, that type of questionnaire kind of thing, so that when you finish, you can do. So basically, we would go out on site and do a check on operating it. Then we'd also do a check on, okay, now you're packing up. Okay, you've closed this. What could happen if it's not closed properly? What are the risks involved with that? And making sure that everything has a safety catch or something like that, or a buzzer, or all those kinds of things.
So was that really a lack, therefore, on on your risk assessment form in terms of your normal risk assessment, where you actually needed a sort of pack up section and really analysis of that, which would then feed in? So was it just simple lack of that section?
Correct.
In a normal risk assessment? So if we keep heading down the same path, we just need to make sure, we need to think about that kind of, what does a shutdown, pack up, Obviously some of the human factors seriously come into this in terms of training and qualifications and what have you, I would think.
Yeah, they do. But I find that in a fleet environment, no matter what the operators do, it all comes back to fleet.
Got to blame someone.
We've got an interesting process here where it's all paper-based at the moment with our daily plant inspections and whatsoever. We've actually got 3 sections within that daily plant inspection, daily check sheet. One's before you start, one's during operation, and then one's at pack up at the end. So the operator sort of has to, it's a tick and flick, which they just tick and flick, of course, but they actually have to acknowledge that they've parked things up and follow the procedure on the daily plant inspection, and that includes where they've parked it and other things. So we've had instances here where in a rural setting, the guys that are driving graders and water carts have inadvertently parked their assets fairly close to a house, is usually the go, so they don't get tampered with, but hadn't really given any thought to the power lines and different things that were usually associated with rural housing. And they've parked, on one occasion, under some high voltage power lines, and we were just lucky actually that the kids that decided to play on the water cart weren't quite tall enough to get themselves in some real trouble there. And that was, when that was all pulled apart at our end, we pulled out the daily plant inspection book and had a look at their pack-up procedures, and they ticked it all and whatever else. And there was a clear thing there that basically said where's it been parked, is it's it was all the brakes applied and all those sorts of things. So maybe it's something like that sort of fits in with it, but we're flat out getting guys to do a daily plant inspection before they start, let alone at the end. So I don't know how all that sort of fits together, but that's how we sort of try and make them accountable for their actions at the end of the day.
Yeah, we're always trying to make them accountable, but for some reason it just comes back to us.
Yeah.
My other thing was I actually emailed Plant Assessor with a few questions. I have over 700 items of plant, and I can't keep up with the risk assessments from Plant Assessor, especially having annually or biannually and things like that. And I questioned them on why, if the truck is doing the same job, why does it need an annual risk assessment? And their comeback was, in case there was leak, hydraulic hoses leaking. I said, well, that's crap, because we maintain our trucks. If it's leaking, it comes into the workshop, it gets repaired. So they've come back to me and they've said to me, basically, they just go on best practice, but you don't have to do the inspections annually. You can do them whenever you like. So, and I said, fine, well, I'll just stretch it out to 7 years of life at the plant. And only if it's involved in an incident, then we'll do a risk assessment, or if the item is used for something different or the location changes. And then we only need to do risk assessments then. And they've said that's fine, but you're not breaching any regulations or laws by doing that. So that's not a problem.
Yeah. Does the risk assessment all fall under the sort of chain of responsibility legislation? Is that what it falls under? Does anyone know the actual legal stance of it? Is it simply under, well, not simply, simply is probably the wrong word, but does it fall under that chain of responsibility, and therefore it's it's like an ISO 9001 type of, self-assessment, determine what's right, determine the frequency, determine whatever else? Or is there any stipulation in terms of actual, minimum requirements or processes or whatever?
It's fall under the WHS Act, I'd say, Mark, but
right.
Yeah, it's like any risk assessment, whether it be a workplace one, whether it be a vehicle one or whatever else, they're always a living document anyway. So
Yes.
if the asset was changing what it was doing, if the locale changed in a way that it had become quite unstable where it was being operated and all those sorts of things, it all becomes part of that responsibility of the people undertaking the task.
Yes.
To assess whether or not they had to revisit the risk assessment. So as far as having a formal date, time, this is how frequently you need to do it, it's not even identified in the Act that way. It's basically, it remains a living document at all times. And if the people conducting the task suddenly recognise another hazard or there's been a significant change in the way they're doing something, they're supposed to basically do it in the entire time. So again, we provide the plant. We have a look at the basic risks associated with operating the plant under normal working conditions, and if they change, that's really not on us. It's up to the people who are operating that asset outside of the scope of its design. So it gets a bit murky, and really you need your WHS guy to help you out there with that and take a bit of responsibility for it, I think.
Hey, Mark, it's Andrew from Bundaberg. Look, currently we're reviewing our risk assessments annually at the major service, so we tack that risk assessment review on there. And we will probably continue to do that in the short term, but we're looking at creating a modification work order in Thornburg. So as soon as the mechanic or workshop supervisor selects modification, it'll trigger off something else, and that'll be a review. One thing it'll do is another risk assessment of why we're performing that modification, and it'll also trigger off a review of that original risk assessment as well. Now, if we can do that the way we want to do it, then potentially we may not have to review that risk assessment annually.
Yeah, because you'd think, I'm just sort of just thinking out aloud. I mean, a lot of your service scheduling and servicing is maintaining that risk or the quality anyway, because if you're performing a service, one of those checks is going to be, I don't know, check that signage is correct. So that is part of the service, not part of risk assessment, because you're actually maintaining, as Marie pointed out, is actually you're already maintaining the quality of the asset. Therefore, you're maintaining that it's not being placed into risk.
Yeah, it's probably more, you fit a toolbox somewhere, you fit an additional toolbox, and all of a sudden that creates a pinch point when the truck turns or the grader turns, that we would deem that as a modification. So what we're trying to do is capture it at that modification level. If we modify any piece of plant, it'll trigger off a secondary process to create a risk assessment before we do the modification, and then review the actual true risk assessment after the fact.
Cool. Any thoughts? Are we heading in the right direction in all of this? Everyone wants us to keep heading this way? And what you're seeing, because this is really very much, making sure that, we're being guided by you guys. Yeah.
I think Andrew's definitely nailed it there as far as identifying it as a modification, as a responsibility to the fleet owner. That's when you've basically modified the plant in a way that it may perform differently or whatever else. So again, it's a living process. It might have had that toolbox, for instance, that Andrew was talking about fitted. It could have been fitted in March, and his annual assessment on it might have been done, in November that year. Well, you've basically got a risk in place there for that entire time. So if you can capture it in the first instance when the toolbox fitted, that would be the go, obviously. Yeah.
So Andrew, if you're going to create that work process and we need to code from it, it'll probably have to be done not as one of those custom templates.
Yes, we probably haven't got to that point just yet, Paul, but I probably need to think through the process a little bit more. So when the workshop identifies a potential modification, I think it would At this point in time, it'd trigger off probably an alert or a notification to the maintenance coordinator, who would then probably sit down and do a separate risk assessment involving the operator, the workshop, and probably someone from the health and safety unit. They would complete that risk assessment, determine the outcome, say fit the toolbox, and then review the original machine risk assessment to determine if we've created any additional problems. That's roughly how I see it at the moment, Paul.
Yeah, it could be a new repair type on an existing work order too.
Okay. Yep. If I want to report then though specifically on any modifications that we've done, is it better being a work order or a repair type, or it doesn't really matter?
Probably doesn't really matter. You can identify, unless there's some sort of specific fields that you want, but we can look at those. They could be revealed on a particular type, or it can be an additional work order. I'm just thinking, if you're going to do the more work orders there are, it probably just means more to manage. That's all, because the work order comes with the overhead of all of the other bits and pieces that goes with it, like the start, stop time, and all that sort of stuff. If you're fitting it as part of repair, then that might be a different story. It might be like an additional thing on a repair. So, anyway, it probably needs a bit of thought.
Point taken. I think we've probably got about 15 work orders at the moment. So, you can argue one way are quite complex, but we've sort of created those work orders to capture specific, details and information. So, look, we'll give it a bit more thought about what we think the process should be, and we'll come back to you.
Excellent. Anything out, again, just sort of open type forum, any sort of feedback or information or direction you'd like us to be, particularly taking? Obviously, we've got fairly full plate for the next couple of weeks at least. We've just had another discussion on our sort of release cycle, and we're trying to still refine that. We're probably going to, and again, Paul might want to throw in here, we might try and keep it to sort of a monthly thing, and particularly if we can keep these interactions going, then we can sort of coordinate a bit of a review, a bit of a discussion, and then release and push it out and stuff like that, if that works for people. Again, if we don't hear anything, we kind of don't know anything. So, please feel free to give us information, feedback, what have you.
It's Michelle here, Mark and Paul. So I just want to give you some feedback on the change that you made, Paul, for the additional items, changing the button, etc. Feedback's really good. I've shown it to others. It's good the fact that you can now favourite an item without having to use it. And I know that the mandatory component of attaching a document is removed. However, our business processes will continue to follow that. The texts do have to add that in. And your funky new component to change drop downs will be eagerly awaited, because we can't wait to use that. In that way, it doesn't affect anyone else's view.
Yeah, so that new component is only on one, only on the reason. Is it the reason for on hold?
Paul, do you want to quickly show everyone? I don't know whether we've shown the others. That was one of the ones we've lifted off the list. Do you want to just quickly throw it up so people know what we're talking about?
Yeah.
And also just feedback on how you're sending the information out, Adam, referencing it in a table against the Mantis item is really good, because we can go through to see what the historical information is and then be able to report back clearly on our testing.
That's good, Michelle. It was also really good you responding to those items on the Mantis as well. That was really helpful.
Reason suspended.
So Michelle, maybe you give a little bit of background, being the user, the driver.
Yeah, look, so basically what we found is we use, in our business process, we have very clear processes that our techs and all users need to follow. And the question we have come up with when we create a supervisor review is, can the asset leave the workshop? The answer is yes, supervisor review is done. And that could still mean that the work order is placed on hold, but it's not critical, maybe in parts were being ordered. And so our drop down for the reason on hold, we found that, like, for example, when the guys might be waiting on an invoice, that item didn't appear. That's, in that one right there, we'd be adding a waiting invoice. Because a waiting other was too broad. And again, we had to click in to go, well, what does that mean? What's other mean? Also, for the admin ladies, they look after insurance and accidents, etc. The drop downs for those reasons on hold also were not very specifically related to their items. So I raised this with Paul to say, I know we can't change this because it affects everybody, but we sort of can't move forward on some of these spaces because we can't pick something that's related, either it doesn't exist or it's not really aligned with that item. So Paul came up with a very groovy tool that you can write a little bit of code and in the drop down selection options that you want, but it's only against reason suspended. And then that will then update that drop down for those particular work orders, and you can do multiples as well. In testing, it was fabulous. I tested it, I added one, I removed one, we reloaded the page and it updated immediately. So it was really, really good.
So just a quick explanation. This is what you're looking at here is the code in the background that drives the options in the list for a drop-down list. So we've got it defined here as drop-down list, and these are all of the entries that would appear in the front when you click the drop-down list. These are hard coded to the template, and everybody shares these templates. So what Michelle was saying is basically we want to change these, but if I change these for Michelle, then I change these for Brad and I change these for everybody. And the business processes that Michelle has, Brad probably doesn't. These options are really sort of hard coded in. To get around that, what I've done is created an external reference for this list. You can do that in a document, and you can see it basically. Your list is here, and what this component will now do, instead of drawing, like if it looks for this particular list, and it does that by being related to the template that it's on, and then it says, okay, so I'm related to that. Is my field name the same? So reason suspended, and if that's true, if both those things are true, it'll draw from this list and not this list. You'll notice this list is the same now, but we can put a new one in. And if I go to here, I'll just refresh that.
And Paul, does it auto sort in alphabetical order?
It presents in the same order as what you've created the list.
Okay, audio. I think you just missed a comma. I think that's all it was in the last item.
I got it up here. That's probably not surprising. I did too. Won't like that. Yeah.
Well done, Michelle. On the development team, you'll be doing the demo next time, Michelle.
No, it's okay.
So now it's drawing from that list that you see, and not the list that's hard coded to the template. There's a number of ways that we provide configurability to the application. This is one. This is a new one. Normally, what we would do is create something like a related document, which we were looking at before, where with the asset group mappings, for instance. So these are all documents that are created elsewhere, and they appear in a drop-down list, very similar to what you just saw the other version. I can create a new document simply by going and creating another one. Okay. And then it will appear in the list as well in a similar way. So that the downside of I mean, there's no real downside, but one of the problems we've got is that if we've sort of rolled out a set of lists already as hard coded, then we try and change over to this type of list where it's a separate document rather than just a piece of information on the template. That requires all of the data that had been created in the old way to be changed over to the new way. That could be like tens of thousands of documents. In Bundaberg's case, it probably would be about that now. So that's not a really viable solution. So the solution that I came up with was let's just use this and have it reference another document. You can see that this is the component name is what drives it. So it says go and find me this bit of code. This component is a separate bit of code. So when the system looks at this, it says go and find me this code and run it. So the component name needs to be this name, and we'll gradually change those over to change those drop-down fields over where we can. One of the problems here is if you define your own list and we're using something in that list to drive some code, and that's no longer in the list because you've defined it a different way, then the code will break. So that just means that some of these lists are really not definable by or if they are definable, they need to be defined the same way for everybody because everybody shares the same code. So for instance, if I had a bit of code that said, if the user selects employee break, go and show where Joe had lunch, for example, then if that code would break if I didn't have this entry called employee break, because there's nothing to drive the code. So this component can be used, but it can only be used in certain places, I guess is the key summary of that.
Thanks, Paul.
No worries.
We're running out of time, so we've used it up. That's good. So just a little bit of guidance on when, perhaps stop sharing the screen there, Paulie. Yep, there we go. Everyone's back in view. Bit of guidance. Presumably December's probably not good, but we're happy to do it. I'm more than happy to turn up on, what are we, sort of maybe not quite this date, it'll be the week before, Chrissy. Do we skip to Jan? We happy to do it in December? Will anyone turn up if we have it in December?
Yeah, we'll be here.
Rory, you're shaking your head there.
I'm having time off.
What?
Who approved that?
Well, look, what we can do is we'll send out one, I suppose, probably be only 3 weeks away, so it might be a really short one, but I suppose we just put in the calendar, and if it's only 45 minutes and it'll give back the time that we've gone over the other times. So, and again, please feel free to send us any guidance on topics or items or anything else, because, you know, really, we want this to be, you know, feedback, interaction, all the rest of it. I mean, they've been fantastic so far. It's been a really great thing. So,
Hi, Mark, it's Nairi.
you know,
Could I make a suggestion for the December one, just to cap off the year? Could we touch base on maybe the use of the calendars in the All Workshop Dash and the roster? You know,
Yep.
just something small, brief, something that we'd probably all use on a regular basis, but that might need a bit of tweaking, or people might have suggestions for. So
It's just not the Gantt chart, I think. The Gantt chart.
okay.
yeah, the weird looking one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that, I noticed that on the Gantt chart, you can't, move an item because it's locked to move. Is that intentional?
Probably.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, it's probably one of those topics that's a two-way discussion. It's not us talking to you; it's talking to about how your workshops operate in that space. Would probably make sense. That's the point of these groups, is to perhaps extract what's not working for you and why it's not working. So that'd be good. That'd be good idea, Nairi.
That Gantt chart to be able to click on it and become full screen on a separate screen, so that we can really dig in and see that.
Right.
Michelle's covered everything I was going to talk about next month.
Oh, there you go. That's a precursor of what we'd like to cover.
Have to go in the queue. Can't promise it. But yeah, it sounds like a good discussion about how you operate the scheduling and everything else would be useful.
Yeah, and also booking time out, like for a lot of people having shutdown times over Christmas, or maybe I don't know, in case of disasters, if you need to reshuffle anything and like urgently, if you've got a shortage of staff, like how we can use that calendar and the rostering to really better our business, I guess.
Yep. Good idea. And just a reminder on the user group, on the email group, if anyone, you know, we can increase our numbers from 3 to 4, that'll be a 25% increase in our numbers. I think Andy sent out an email to all 3 of us. But it's there. If it doesn't work, you know, it doesn't work. Thank you, everyone.
And I've been prompted by a couple of members of the group to make comment about Adam's mustache.
Yeah.
But
Well done.
I've heard the word outstanding being used.
So if I send around a link to my Movember page, everyone will donate, yeah?
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a good couple of weeks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Hang around.